Hey there, I'm Scott, and this is Tangents. Well, I've been trying very hard not to talk about politics, and I'm not sure that I'm really going to succeed today. In fact, I'm sure I'm not going to succeed today. What I want to talk about is something that is at least tangentially connected, and I think it's something, on the surface, and if you look at the title of this, you probably won't get the direct connection, but I think it's actually kind of deep and underlying problem that, or at least getting around one, that I think is at least partially responsible for where we are. And so the title today is Incel, or Incels, probably. And I have a lot of thoughts about this. Um, I've talked about Gamergate before. I don't really want to go over that too much more, but I do want to say, I think it was like 2014. I don't even remember what year. Maybe it was 2016. Seems like 14. Whatever it was, there was this thing, really stupid, and basically, I mean, they would say it's about ethics in journalism. And basically it was just a bunch of assholes, gamers, who, not that every gamer is an asshole, but these were assholes, gamers, overlap of the two circles in the Venn diagram. So these assholes were basically very upset that a couple of women were upset that games very often would show, shall we say, scantily clad women, would put women in bad positions. They do a lot of things that were just deeply and fundamentally sexist and biasing. And they basically made a lot of games kind of suck if you're a woman to play. And also probably sent bad messages for dudes. And so, there would be these articles, and people who didn't like the articles would claim, sort of something that rhymes a little bit with fake news, ethics in journalism. They would talk about how these articles were biased and lying and all this bullshit. And basically what it came down to was you have a bunch of dudes who were upset that not even, I mean, the funny thing is, it's not like the women who were talking about this, and they weren't all women, but the people who were talking about this, many of whom were very well-known women, or sort of prominent in this domain anyway, they were not saying like abolish all this stuff. They were just saying, why don't we have some games where it's not quite this bad, Why don't we have some games that, don't just have like the woman going into battle with the giant breasts like heaving over her what passes for armor. Maybe have something that looks a little bit, more like something you might wear. Maybe have something that doesn't frame women in sort of a, like pure eye candy way. I don't want to get into the details of that beyond that. It's something, the only real contact I ever had with these people was I was on Twitter at the time. And on Twitter, so these people, there's an interesting thing that seems to happen. I think it's just human nature, but you have kind of a back channel, front channel thing. People talk behind closed doors and then go out and coordinate things and then do stuff in public. And I think this is, if you understand this is something that people do a lot, it explains some things on Twitter today. I don't generally do this, although I am in a couple of group chats on Twitter, and I have people like constantly just sharing tweets that they're looking to have boosted. What these Gamergator people would do is they'd go on something called 4chan or B-chan or whatever the fuck chan. These things that were just essentially very loosely moderated, if at all, sites and their communities where people would just talk about stuff. And I guess I've never been, but my understanding is basically it is a hellhole of racism and sexism and stupid shit that, just, a bunch of people who frankly are just kind of pissed off and maybe, hyper privileged. The one thing that always bothers me about, but I don't know how to say this exactly. Privilege is very much like air. Like, I'm aware that there's air in this room. I know it on a, kind of deep level. Have some understanding of it. But if I'm not focused on the fact that there's air in this room, I will forget about it. I'm aware that I have a fair bit of privilege being a white dude. Cis white male, a lot of privileges are attached to that. And that doesn't mean that my life is easy or that everything is just handed to me. But it does mean that there are a lot of situations where if I was a woman, if I was black, if I was gay or trans or whatever, things would roll differently. The probabilities shift a little bit. And the thing about all of these things is, from your own perspective, things just seem, everything is just normal. If you're Louis the 16th, everything is normal. If you're a kid who, has just got flies buzzing around your eyes and you're starving to death and your belly is distended, that's normal. I mean, it's kind of the human condition that whatever we're experiencing, however far it might be on the spectrum, that just seems like the way things are. You get used to it, and it's shocking also how quickly you can go from one state to another, and your normal will shift. In fact, I'd say, and this is actually based on not just my own observations, but some evidence. If you have some kind of disruptive event, it could be trauma, it could be something great. You get married, you win the lottery. It could be, you lose a limb, you have a disease, somebody in your family does. You lose a friend or relative. Things like this. You move to a new place. At first, obviously it's a disruption. But then you gradually, and for some people more quickly than others, sort of return to your normal state. People, if their circumstances get worse, they'll be upset, certainly. But they kind of return to, if you're generally kind of positive person, that's kind of your, now I'm not saying that's necessarily your temperament, could be through training or whatever, but that becomes normal for you. If, you win the lottery, you suddenly find yourself extremely wealthy. That, at first, it's like, wow, this is awesome. And then pretty quickly becomes normal. If you were upset and sad before that, you're probably going to be upset and sad after. If you were generally content, you'll probably be generally content after. And I mean, this is not like no matter what the thing is, but for a huge range. And I really think it has a lot to do with sort of the nature of human perception. I mean, you just can't have an absolute scale. And so we calibrate everything based on what we see and what we experience. This is also probably partly why people feel better about themselves, even if they have less, if they see somebody else who has even less, that they feel above. I don't mean people in general, I'm not saying everybody is terrible, but even the people that are pretty egalitarian, you kind of calibrate your scales based on this. On the other hand, if you have more, say you have a lot more, but suddenly you find yourself a millionaire. That's awesome, isn't it? Well, now you start hanging out with people who have much more money than you. Tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars. People who could multiply your net worth by a factor of 5 with basically pocket change. The things that they're able to do, the sort of stuff that is within their grasp is far from yours. And you see that and you're like, well, shit. People, and I'm not saying by any means that people with millions of dollars are poor or suffering or any, not saying that at all. But once you get to that kind of tier and you start meeting the people, I think this is what happens to people in Congress. They're by and large millionaires. but they're hanging out with people with so much more money that they feel poor because you have this comparison. Your scale is not absolute, it's relative. And if your relative, is up here, sorry. So back to, this atmosphere thing. This is just normal for me, being in air. Having the privilege that I do is just normal for me. I am aware that it's not, but it's really hard, and it's something that you have to actively focus on, or you just forget the air is there. And I do think to some extent people who are less privileged, I do think if you're less privileged, you kind of start seeing the comparison a little bit. You're like, it seems wrong. Like, that person just did the same thing I did, or even worse, and faced no consequences, while I did something that was nothing, and the hammer came down. And on Twitter, the hammer coming down could be swarms of people attacking you. So the Gamergaters, it is back to what I was talking about. The Gamergaters would get in their back channel. Somebody would say something about them. And this is how I encountered them. I mean, I saw this happening to people before it happened to me. But the people that I saw it happen to were mostly, the one whose name in particular I remember is Feminist Frequency. But there was also Brianna Wu, a bunch of other people. And they were just getting clobbered constantly. You'd see this and you'd go to any tweet that they would make and their fucking replies were terrible, atrocious. Like, what the fuck is wrong with these people? But at the same time, you're not getting it. So you're like, that's just how it is, kind of. I, a couple of times, spoke up and said, what the fuck is wrong with these Gamergaters? And now you can say that and it seems to be fine. Seem to not be searching for their name or whatever. At the time, I didn't mention them, I just kind of mentioned the word. And all of a sudden, and for me, it wasn't that long, it wasn't that hard, but for 20 minutes, an hour, my replies were filled. I'd have 20 or 30, I was gonna say people, but I think a lot of them are sock puppets. I don't know how many actual people are behind this. I suspect very strongly that it's a much smaller number of people. Part of it is also coordinating through the back channel. You steer a few people there, but I think each one of the people that is there has several of these sock puppet accounts. So one person seems like 5 or 10, and you get 5 or 10 there, it's like hundreds of people are just tossing shit your way. And so I would say, again, happened a couple times. And after 20 or 30 minutes of this, I was, no bullshit, almost ready to leave Twitter. I'm a pretty active long-term Twitter user, Twitterer, if you will, but a little window, a little glimpse of this, and I was ready to leave. And it gave me a newfound appreciation for the women who were just constantly, and I was just getting little shit flung at me. These are people who were getting death threats and rape, or people would find they'd dox them, find their address, and threaten to hurt them or people that they care about. I can't imagine getting that, and they would get this constantly. Again, mine was a tiny little glimpse. That's their day. And it's still like that on Twitter now. It's actually really fucking annoying when you think about it that Dorsey and the rest of the executive team there have known about this problem. Certainly for more than half a decade, and they've done small little piddly things about it, but basically nothing. Pretty close to fuck all. They have done the quality filter, so I have a blue check. I don't see replies from people who are sort of low quality, but if you're not a blue check, you still get the shit. And it's amazing also, just sock puppet accounts abound. And I understand why it is too. It's because, Twitter's whole business model is basically ad generated revenue. I've talked about that several times before, but I really am convinced that if you make a company and you decide that your business model is to basically give your shit away, almost inevitably, you do have to pay for real hard costs. Especially if you're like Twitter or Facebook, you're gonna have to pay for servers and bandwidth and internet connections and all this kind of stuff. CDNs cost money. Distributed databases cost money. All that infrastructure, all the people to maintain the infrastructure, the coders and all, developers, all cost money. And so you've got to pay for it. How do you do it? Well, you've given the shit away for free. Going from free to charging something probably scare off a ton of people. So now you're stuck. And basically, I've given this a lot of thought. You could ask people to donate. Feels a little shitty. People don't respond well to it. Or you can start putting out ads. And in other ways, basically selling the information of your users, because you've got a lot of it, and selling, the attention of your users, because that's your whole fucking system. So in the process of selling this, they're telling advertisers, hey, we have this many eyeballs, we can get them to look at your shit. And so it helps them to inflate the number of eyeballs. So every sock puppet account that looks like an active user, it's another set of fake eyeballs. As far as the advertisers are concerned, it's real. I'm increasingly convinced that almost all, and maybe I'm just wrong on there, but I really believe this. Almost all ads on YouTube, on Twitter, Facebook, whatever, I think that these are a scam for the advertisers. Like, I think they're paying, like the advertisers are paying money, and I'm sure, they do metrics on conversions and those kind of stuff. People actually do click links and then get, but for the most part, I think they're showing shitty ads that nobody cares about to bots or sock puppets or people like me who, at one point in time, my policy was basically, if you send me a promoted tweet, I will just block you. I've given up on that because it's like trying to push back the ocean. But I'm never gonna fucking buy something based on an ad. If anything, if I was on the fence of buying something, I wish people wouldn't respond to retargeting because it's creepy and weird. If I see your thing and I was thinking about buying something from you, I'm gonna try not to buy it unless I really have to. So I see that retargeted shit. I went to your thing here and then I start seeing it here. It's creepy. I don't want anything to do with that. But unfortunately, it works. And so I do think, the advertising works, but by and large, I think you're paying for nothing. You may be like, some small percentage of what you're paying for actually is useful, but I don't think it's, I would bet if you did a study, you could really find that. In fact, I read an article about this like a week or two ago. There was, it was an advertising network who was basically charging a shit ton of money. I think it was for Uber. I hate it when it's like the worst person makes a good point. Uber's a terrible company, but I think they were paying something ridiculous, like hundreds of millions of dollars for this ad network. And something happened, ended up not paying, zero delta in terms of conversions or response or anything. So basically, they found that they were burning money for nothing. And I think this is most of advertising. And the thing about advertising also is that, I guess it's less so now because you can actually track, like somebody saw this ad, they clicked the link, they did this, and you can see a progression. In the 50s, people would put up ads and then you'd have no idea if the ads worked or not. It was just a perceptual thing. So maybe it's better now, I don't know. But I think, by definition almost, advertising is bullshitting. So it's not shocking that the people who are selling ads are probably full of shit and lying to the people they're selling the ads to, in addition to the people they're showing the ads to. So anyway, Dorsey et al. See that they have all these bots. They know it. And I'm not saying that it's easy to filter these things out, but you can see that they're making basically no effort because algorithmically, you know, you could make it a weekend project and filter out. Now, granted, they would get smarter and work around your filters, but if there was any filtering at all, as it is now, they're just obvious. These bot accounts, the name, you just glance at it, they have the followers, and then you go through the followers, and it's like some network of people following each other. The images that they'll use, just everything about them screams not real. And I'm using the word bot. This is like the hacker versus cracker dichotomy. A lot of people at one point in time were trying to push the word cracker to mean sort of like a black hat hacker, where hacker was just like anything that's, like tinkering with stuff. Cracker was someone who was like actually breaking into stuff. Didn't work. I tried for a long time to really distinguish between bot and sock puppet and all this stuff. I think I've kind of given up. I say bot now, and I even mean sock puppet, and because that's what people do. It's annoying and it's confusing, but I do it. But you have all these bot and sock puppet accounts that you could very quickly filter out if you wanted to. They don't, probably because there's some money involved. And when I say money, I mean, like Dorsey is a billionaire. Now, he's one of the less evil billionaires, maybe, I guess, because he's given $1 billion worth of stuff to, and you look at this kind of stuff and you're like, does that make you, you're still hoarding money. I mean, you're not as bad as someone who's just hoarding it and not giving it away, although, to some extent, I don't know. I don't give too much credit to somebody who has billions of dollars and they give away $1 billion, because in reality, I mean, $1 billion, I've talked about this, and I'm not going to go through like comparisons, but it's so much money, like it's almost inconceivable. And again, if you're a billionaire, that just becomes your new normal. As I was talking about before, that's just how things are. That's your atmosphere. But from the perspective of a, air quotes, normal person, somebody who has a net worth in the thousands or zero, $1 billion is almost an inconceivable amount of money. It's so much, like you can kind of get your hands on $1 million. You can understand what $1 million buys. You can understand the things that, cost a few $1 million. You can really grok that. 1,000 million is really a stretch. I'm somebody who has a lot of training in physics and mathematics, and I've done a lot of work with very big and very small numbers. And so I can kind of grasp a little bit, like an inkling of how much $1 billion is. But even for me, it's hard. And for most people, I think if you don't think about it a lot, $1 billion is so much money. It just doesn't, they'll have an idea in their mind where $1 billion is basically like, it's like a couple million, And I don't mean that they think that literally, but I mean that's, if you put the scale in their mind of, like this is $1, this is $1 million, which ends up being like thousands of, the scale is way off. And then this is $1 billion. It's not like, oh, this is $1, and then this is 1 million of those, and then this is 1 billion of those. The scale is just difficult to hold your head around. And then when you think about people who have like hundreds of billions of dollars, you cannot even conceive of what $1 billion is. You're fucked when you're trying to think of $100 billion. It's just, I mean, it's just outside of the realm of anything that you almost can conceive of on a normal, everyday basis. So, when somebody has that much money, if you can give away $1 billion and still be a billionaire, I'm not sure that $1 billion would have done anything for you. I'm not sure, like, what could you do? You think about it, I mean, it really is a sincere question. If your net worth is $100 billion, Jeff Bezos said the only way that he could deploy that much capital, and this is not true, of course, that there are many other ways, but it is true that he said this, the only way he could deploy his wealth was to develop a space program. Now, space program, like, it's a fucking expensive endeavor. And even though today it's much simpler than it was, say, in the 1950s, we know a lot, we have a roadmap, we know a lot of the stuff, it's still a fucking expensive thing. And you think about, like, countries, most countries don't have a fucking space program. If you're in the position where you're like developing a space program, you probably have a lot of money. I mean, and when I say that, I mean, Bezos, it's not an exaggeration to say that he could not only end world hunger, extreme poverty, wipe it out, he could do it and still have fuck tons of billions of dollars. Now, I'm not saying that this is necessarily a thing where you just throw money at the problem and fix it. Although, I was watching a video with Adam Savage yesterday, and he said something. He was talking about, somebody asked him a question. One of his patrons, I can never say the word. One of his supporters said, like, what would you do to fix the American education system? And he's like, I'm in no way qualified to do that, blah, blah. People like to say, this is a problem you can't just throw money at. But then you think about it and it's like, well, maybe you can. Because you think about the problems. I mean, there are certainly, and he was not suggesting that this was not the case either, but certainly there are things where there are deep fundamental issues that money is not going to fix. But if you want to talk about classroom size, if you want to talk about the number of teachers you have, the qualifications of those teachers, the like student-teacher ratio, the facilities, the equipment, the books, all of this stuff, it's all money. And it's all fixable with more money. Some things can be solved by throwing money at them. Now, that's not to say, there are plenty of nations where there are tons of people in extreme poverty. And I wish I could attribute this to the person who I just read it from, but there are very few poor nations. People like to think about kind of like, oh, there's a third world country, it's a poor nation. You look at, like Nigeria has a lot of poverty. Nigeria is a fucking wealthy nation. It's actually really tragic when you look at it because they have, and I'm not even just talking about natural resources, which they have in abundance, but they have crazy amounts of money. The problem is that money is concentrated into a few hands, and you have some people who are wealthier than you can imagine, and then you have other people, many of them, who are not. And you kind of look at this, and I'm not a student of history. I don't know enough about this stuff to really speak to it. My gut kind of says this is transgenerational violence from, formerly being a colony. Formerly, the colonialists came in and fucked everybody over. You've kind of created this abuse, and now the colonialists are gone, but you've got this pattern set up where now people in the country are the colonialists. They're like the colonialists without the colonialists. And the other people, they're the ones that are getting fucked over. And it's just, I really do think that that's kind of, part of it. Anyway, getting way off subject here, which is kind of my shtick. It's kind of my thing. Going back, Gamergate was a thing, blah, blah, blah. The Gamergaters beget, well, I think the Gamergaters kind of beget the horrible people who, like supported Trump, not to get into politics, but, like I'm saying, it's hard to escape. A lot of the same patterns that you would see. Now, maybe part of these were just like self-organizing systems and human nature kind of looks the same, but it was shocking how many similarities there were to the people who were doing that stuff, these weird frog-looking things, this kind of just assholes online. Also on 4chan and BChan and all this stuff and coming to Twitter and elsewhere. It was like the whole Gamergate thing was almost a dry run. It doesn't, it sounds like almost a conspiracy theory, but then you think about it, Bannon, pardoned Bannon, motherfucker, that guy was in the Gamergator shit, and then he was in the Trump shit. It's not like, yeah, I feel like I feel like I should have a board back here with the, pegs and the board and the pieces of yarn connecting pictures of things. But I mean, it's not like that big of a leap to think, oh, the Gamergators kind of, there's a natural progression from that to the Trumpers, the MAGA people, and to the shit that we have today. And I would even say to, the Hillary Bros or whatever the fuck they're called, Hillbots, that's it. The K-Hive, K-Hive, if you're not familiar with K-Hive, you're lucky, but there's this Bernie Bro trope, which again, I think a lot of those, the people who were giant assholes there, I think still kind of stem from this stuff. The K-Hive are the Kamala Harris people, like crazy, fervid supporters, who honestly are like everything that you've ever heard about Bernie Bros except real. That's kind of what they are. It's ridiculous actually how bad this group is. It's having interacted with them, and again, I try to understand, like any person with millions of supporters is going to have some percentage. It's one of these things. It's hard to have a hard time understanding a billion, even a million. A million people, a million of anything. You think, well, a million is 1,000,000. 1% of 1,000,000. What is 1%? 1% doesn't sound like very much at all. It's like a penny. What is a penny? Well, it's not 1,000. It's 10 fucking thousand people. 1% of a group of 1,000,000 people is 10,000 people. I mean, you think about that. It's 10,000 is a pretty decent sized number. I mean, it shows you, and then, I mean, you want to go down the same path. A billion, well, 1% of that is 10 million people. 10 million is a big number that's hard to conceive of. Well, that's 1% of a billion. That's how much a billion is. 10,000 is even hard. You can kind of wrap your head around it, but think about how big a group of people 10,000 people is. Well, that's just 1% of a group with 1,000,000 people. And you look at, say, the size of Bernie's supporters, the people who love Kamala, tens of millions of people, certainly more than single digits. And you start thinking, well, shit, even if it's just like a percentage or so who are assholes, you're gonna see the assholes. And the thing about assholes is they're like potassium permanganate. A little bit of them goes a long fucking way. You don't need that many assholes to really fuck up everything for everybody. It's an unfortunate thing. You need a shit ton of good people. One asshole fucks it all up for everybody. So you have to keep that in mind when you see this stuff. And I'm sure maybe the K-Hive has nice people and decent people. But all I can say is all my interactions with K-Hive have basically been the things that people accused the Bernie Bros, giant air quotes, of being. But anyway, going back here, never since the beginning have I even mentioned the word incel. The incel thing, involuntarily celibate, is a group of people. These kind of overlap with the air quotes MRAs, men's rights activists, as though that was a thing. As though, this is one of these things. If you're not aware of the atmosphere and you don't think about it, you can feel like you're being oppressed when, other people are just kind of lifted up to your level. If you're used to being up here and the other people even come up, not even to parity, but just come up a little bit, it's like, oh shit, I'm going down. This is I'm not saying that's the actual reality of it, but that is a lot of people's perception of it. And it's kind of a human nature thing. Unfortunately, if you don't intentionally work to not think that way. I think that's kind of how people think. And certainly some percentage of people, and as we mentioned, when you have 8 billion people, a percentage of people is a fuck ton of people. So you have these people who, by and large, and I'm lumping them together, I'm generalizing a lot of stuff. Obviously, whenever I make a generalization, it should go without saying, but generalizations are not real, but statistically, it's a decent generalization to make. So a lot of these people, large percentage, are sort of pimply faced, generalization, Scott. Often dudes, some women, more dudes than dudettes, but a lot of dudes, and they're say like teenagers, early 20s, not a lot going on, not really a lot of juice. They don't have not a lot of money. They don't have a lot of success. Often not a lot of education or prospects, but they do play games, and they do get on these online communities, and they're all like sort of. I'm not saying they're all like fat, but the picture of Cartman sitting there, like a big blob in front of his computer, it's kind of what you think of. And again, I'm not saying they're all, there are some skinny, spindly motherfuckers who are in the group too. So it's not like generalizations are universal. But you have this group of people, and they've come up with this thing. I think it's kind of, it's something that I think is worth bringing up because it reminds me, in a weird way, of something that I had in my own life. Although, of course, my take on it was radically different than theirs. I was not the most socially. You might go, Scott, hey, you're so fucking cool. How could you not have been the most socially? No, I'm sorry. Believe it or not, I was once not the most socially adept person. I still have a bit of social anxiety, but I had crap tons of it at one point in time. I never dated until my early 20s. Never had sex until my ex-wife, also like early to mid 20s. And, if I was in this group of people and I thought the way they do, whether they're raised badly or they just don't think, maybe it's the whole long chopsticks, long spoons thing. They just don't think like that. But whatever it is, this group of people have come up with this idea, like they're in that situation. I just sat there and thought, well, I did think certainly like maybe it's never going to happen. You get to be like 21 or 22 and you never dated and you're like, maybe it's never going to happen. And it's not like that's that given the perspective that you have then, thinking that that's the way things are always going to be, it's again, like whatever is normal is normal. It's hard to really step back and go, hey, things are going to improve, buddy. It's hard to get that. And even if somebody said that and you knew they were right, it still doesn't feel real, It's not really hard. It's not something you can easily grasp. So you have these people, and they, in my case, I kind of internalized it. I think this is one of the differences, one of the reasons that I never would ever in a million fucking years consider myself to be involuntarily celibate. I internalized it, and my version was, hey, it's not that I have this, this is, in their way of thinking, as far as I can tell, they are, obviously good and awesome, and they just deserve to have, not just women interested in them, but like hot models. Like, the sexiest, most attractive women in the world are what this guy deserves. Like literally, that's how he thinks. And they have a weird sort of thing where it's just like the fact that that doesn't happen is like some kind of atrocity to them, and which I assume this is like massive privilege combined with like your parents are doing a shitty fucking job. Whatever it is, I don't even really care. But I do know these are people who just sort of see themselves in this perspective. And they've attributed this to, societies being unfair. And, they have a whole fucking slew of, I get really bothered by conspiratorial thinking because it's like an anti-parsimony kind of thing. If you apply now, Occam's razor is a guideline. It's not like it's always right, but generally speaking, if you have two explanations and one is simpler, the simpler one tends to be the correct one. That's, parsimony. It doesn't always, but usually that's the one you're gonna. And also, like, if you have two explanations, start with the simpler one until you rule it out, and then go to the more complicated one. And then if that one is too simple, go to the next until you get to the simplest one that actually works. Conspiratorial thinking is basically almost immediately jumping to, I mean, you can't say the most complicated because however complicated something is, you can always make it more complicated. But you have something that is exquisitely complicated, and that is your answer. It's not the obvious, simple answer. It's not that, you just, you're young. A lot of people your age don't date. I'm sorry, get over your fucking self. You're not God's gift to women. I mean, look in the mirror. Maybe instead of fucking obsessing over this and feeling like you're getting screwed, maybe go to the fucking gym. Maybe, study or work on, it doesn't even have to be something like that. Work on art, go get a guitar and start playing the fucking thing. I don't even care what the fuck you do, but do something, improve yourself, internalize it. And I'm not saying you're sitting there going like, hey, I'm gonna master this guitar and then women are gonna flock to me. But I am saying that if you get really focused on something and you get good at it, and not only that, but you kind of aren't, this is not useful advice, I understand, but if you're obsessed with trying to get with a woman, then it's not gonna happen. You start focusing on other shit, you start not being so concerned about it, and then magically it kind of happens often. It's kind of annoying, I have to say. It is. It's one of these things where the more you need it, the less that you're going to get it. But that's the way things are. I'm sorry. And I'm not saying that you necessarily even need it. You have the idea that you need it. You're probably, granted, some people only live to be 20, if even that. But more likely than not, you're going to live many, many years more. You have a lot of opportunities. It's not like this is just the way things are and that's it. And you start working on this other stuff. And in the process of, you go rock climbing. I didn't go rock climbing to meet women. I went rock climbing because I liked climbing on shit. And, in the process of doing that, it gives you something that you really enjoy doing, something that and I'm not suggesting rock climbing, but, just as an example, you do it and then you start getting good at it and you start getting really and then pretty soon, it's something that you are doing with other people. It's something where, you actually start developing some skill and competence at, some real confidence. This is I get very hung up on the concept of confidence for a lot of reasons, but one of them is I think there are a lot of people, there are a lot of people out there who have sort of a fake confidence. They come across as confident. And unfortunately, it works, kind of. People take you at face value. They, generally speaking, take you as you present yourself. So if you act confident, they will think that you've got something to justify it. If you act like you know everything, they will, by and large, act like you know everything. This is part of how Elizabeth Holmes works. You see people like this. It's how Trump works a little bit. It's like people act like they know something. They act like they've got something. Unfortunately, it's the effect of take a clipboard and you know, walk into a hospital with a clipboard under your shoulder and you kind of like walk in like you own the place and nobody will fucking question you. People take you as you present yourself. So fake confidence works, annoyingly. But fake confidence is still fake. Real confidence, I've found, not that I'm the most confident person in the world by any means, but I've found in my life where I really start having confidence is when I have a lot of competence. And it's not just competence, like the ability to do certain things, but it's that it's real and substantial. And you're like, oh, I've actually, you know, I've done this before. I have climbed that 512 and I feel pretty fucking good about it. And then, you know, you sit there and, you know, I mean, it does, I'm not saying you're like the cockiest kind of person in the world, but, you know, it gives you a little bit of confidence. Now, part of that is also just knowing, hopefully, your limitations. That fake confidence doesn't really have limitations. It's a difference. Now, that's not to say, like, I do lots of things, I work on lots of things where I'm not completely certain I can do them. Pretty sure, you know, I know kind of the steps, but I'm reaching a little bit beyond my grasp, knowing from experience that I'll almost certainly get there. That's one kind of confidence. This fake confidence, like people will be absolutely certain that they can do, well, not to pick on Elizabeth Holmes, but yeah, I can't help it. People will be absolutely certain they can do X, even though a ton of experts tell them otherwise. And it doesn't help when you have, you know, a bunch of people with a lot of money throwing it at you, saying, oh, the experts don't know what they're talking about. You definitely, you know, all these idiots with PhDs who know or who think they know better, and you're gonna, you know, it's not the way things work. But that's, you know, this is how you get to be Elizabeth Holmes. It's this kind of overinflated ego bullshit. It's terrible. One thing I would say also about like real confidence versus fake confidence, the fake confidence very often is interested in like not elevating themselves and other people, but cutting others down to make themselves seem elevated. Whereas real confidence, in my opinion, and generally speaking, in my experience, you're not only trying to actually improve yourself, you're trying to help other people. That's part of it. That's, you know, like I've climbed that wall and, you know, I can tell you kind of what to do. I can say, you know, like move your hips. Your hip, you don't think about it, but your hip being like over here versus over here gives you so much more extension in your arm. And right now, if your hip is the wrong way, because you're not thinking about it, you can't even reach that hold. You rock your hips this way and suddenly it's easy to reach. And you're sitting there going like, oh, shit, I actually know something. You feel good about it. You help somebody, they feel good about it. I think that's kind of, not to keep going to the rock climbing, but yeah, I think that's where a lot of confidence is and what it's like. Whereas you have these incels again, and this is their name for themselves, not something I would ever call them, not something I would ever, you know, I think the mentality that gets people calling themselves this is part of the problem, you know? And these are people who are just, yeah, they know, and you can feel it too, like coming off of them. You can feel that they know there's just like this hollow shell. And they know that anything that scratches that is just going to cause it to shatter. So they get very hyper defensive. They get really assholey. You know, it's like their logic is telling them in their weird distorted framework, women don't like them because of X. And so now they become misogynistic. And, you know, it's just, it's a thing. It's a whole cluster of stuff. I'm not going to go too much into it, but it's, you know, like, it's an interesting and really kind of tragic phenomenon. And the thing that's mostly tragic about it is that these are the same people who, honestly, if they would just fucking work on themselves for a few years, magically, at some point, they'd stop being incels. They would start getting dates. You know, I mean, it's just how things go, honestly. And so, yeah, I don't know, it bugs the shit out of me, honestly, seeing these people. I feel like I'm saying honestly a lot, but yeah, and I'm saying a lot. It bugs the shit out of me to see people do like working this way, thinking this way, mainly because, I mean, first off, they're hurting themselves, which is, you know, counterproductive. It's not, you're not helping yourself. And you see somebody like not helping themselves, and you just go like, dude, if you did this, if you put your hips this way and you reach that way, or you put your foot here and you did this, you'd get there. But of course, part of their whole thing is they're so fundamentally insecure that anyone trying to help them is taken as an attack. It's not that you're trying to help them, it's that you are shining a light on their inadequacy. And so, you're actually hurting them. Whereas in reality, you don't mean it that way. You mean like, hey, I can help you. You might even mean, hey, I was once there. I once had trouble getting dates. I once, didn't have sex until I was like in my early 20s. I can help guide you a little bit, or you can just keep, okay, just keep doing that, whatever makes you happy. So, and I'm not saying that all of this is the general cluster of like the Trump supporters and the crazy fucking Republicans. And it's not just Republicans, obviously. There are lots of people across the spectrum. To the extent that I've sat here and like yelled, maybe, if I have, I don't think I really have. In fact, I'm gonna say I haven't yelled at all here. I might have gotten more vocal, but I haven't gone like, rah, rah, rah. I just don't do it. There's this dude, Jimmy Dory. Now, I've never watched him. I've never listened to him. I've seen like few seconds of a clip of him showing a tweet of mine. That's like my introduction to him. For a long time, I was a mutual. He followed me. I followed him back. Didn't know anything more than that. And I've gathered since then that he's a very angry guy. And I'm not saying he's an incel by any means, but I am saying that there's a lot of similar patterns here. And you have also this kind of Rush Limbaugh-esque thing. It's such a horrible... It causes me physical pain that, like, NPR, I can't stand. Now, if you were going, if you're just listening to me, you'd probably think, hey, maybe NPR would be the place for you. Maybe, and I'm not saying like to actually just be there, but you might think, hey, at least that's the thing, that would probably be your jam. No, I can't stand it. I find it painful. I also find Limbaugh and that kind of thing, and Dory, painful. And not just painful, but fake. When I was a kid, I always saw like these punk bands and rock bands, and they're just so angry, and it just never felt like a real thing to me. I mean, it feels like they're putting on an act. Now, I'm not saying there aren't people who are genuinely angry, but I have seen people genuinely angry in my life, and it's a different character than this. It's, the people that I've seen that are generally like genuinely angry are like actually scary. And they're not that way all the time. It's just sort of a switch flips. And then you see this person who formerly seemed like okay, genuinely angry. And they're scary, and you feel like they could do something. They're threatening, and like you want to go the fuck, your asshole clenches, and you're like, oh fuck, get back off. Just maintain eye contact. Don't do anything. Don't move too quickly. Get the fuck out of here. Don't get hurt. That's the response that you get. You see these punk bands, and they're just like, it feels like an act. It feels like they're just putting on a show. It feels like they want to be angry, and this is how they conceive of being angry. It's more like, I'm not saying it's just sadness, pretending to be angry, but that's kind of kind of what I gather from it. Rock and roll also. I mean, and I like some rock and roll. I even like some punk music. But, you know, if your band is called the Fuck You Ups and you're just sitting there like, you know, I don't know. I mean, come on. I guess if it works for you and you enjoy it, what the hell? But it just doesn't, it never felt real to me. And I'm a guy who, maybe my judgment is just fucked up because I like a lot of like, yeah. I always kind of characterize my musical taste as sort of teenage lesbian from the 90s. It's basically, you know, whatever you'd picture her listening to, you know, your sort of stereotypical version. Probably a lot of parallels. Yeah, so I'm not saying that that's like the best music in the world. I'm not saying that it's even that genuine either, but I can, you know, I can listen to, I'm trying to think of examples, Alanis Morissette. She's upset in her songs. You can feel there was a real thing there. Shakira, you know, happy, sad, whatever, you feel some emotion there. It's an interesting thing. I remember briefly, I had a roommate who was very into American Idol. Never before and since this watched it, but this roommate was really into it. I was into her. I was her roommate. And so I watched American Idol with her. And Brooke White was on there. And Brooke White is LDS, LSD, Mormon. And I'm not saying that's in a disparaging way, but she was singing a song, and I can't think of the name of the song. I can't think of, God, it's going to kill me. I should just hit pause, get it, and then magically I know it. But she sang a song, and this song was a song that has a lot of Carly Simon. I bet you think this song is about you. You're so vain. Brooke White, and by all means, please go to YouTube or something. Listen to the Brooke White version of this. And it just feels like someone singing somebody else's words, as it is, who has no concept of what was behind it. Whereas you listen to Carly Simon sing it, and you feel, is it Carly Simon? It'd be funny if I had the wrong name there. But that original song, you can feel it's like a story of an amalgamation of a few things that happened in this person's actual life, versus Brooke White. It's like, you know, you're so vain, and just kind of like doesn't have the depth to it. That hollowness is how I perceive punk and a lot of this angry, like metal-y kind of stuff. But anyway, I think with that, never any conclusion to these things. There's never any like nice denouement or wrapping everything up. That's kind of where it is. And I could just go on, but I think that's enough. I think you've suffered enough. You've made it this far. We're good, right? I gotta tell you, one thing that, this is gonna be the last thing that I say here, but I think a lot of people see me on Twitter and they see the things I say and they say the way that I say them. And they also see that I'm not really interested in participating in certain kinds of bullshit. I think a lot of them think that I'm a very angry person. And in reality, like I'm not saying I never get angry, but it's an extremely rare thing. And it's also like, I'm just generally kind of relatively chill. Even when I shouldn't be. Yeah, it's like, a little too mellowed. I'm not complaining about it. I think it's one of these things actually, like, I'm grateful for my sort of biological set point there. It's similarly, pretty much no matter what I eat, I stay relatively thin. You know, pretty much no matter what the circumstances are. My dad died when I was 21, but my dad died. Obviously, big fucking thing, horrible, sad, but pretty quickly, you know, I'm not saying I was over it, but it's like, you know, just kind of returned to normal. Um, Actually, my dog dying, which has now been, wow, it's probably like going on 4 or 5 years. That one, I'm not saying it was harder than my dad dying, but in some ways, kind of, because, my dad sort of felt, well, for years and years, parents were divorced, and I would see him in the summer. I'd see him, like once every month or two. Yeah, you keep in touch, have a call periodically, but it's like kind of there and just out of sight, but eventually you go back. Maybe I'm just delusional, and I think, and some part of me thinks, like, oh, he's just out there. We just haven't seen him in a while. It's been decades, but um, I don't really think that, but I mean, you can kind of understand, like, it's a different kind of relationship versus your dog. You're like every day in close, intimate contact with, and have this connection, and from the time that she was a little puppy, uh, through her death. And that one I still feel. I mean, I'm not saying I don't feel my dad too, but and of course this is a younger, more recent wound, but that one just really, just got me. um Actually, like, it takes me aback just to think about it now. But even with that, I was just crushed, and there for like a month, I was just, I'd go to, we would go to Dutch Brothers. I started this pattern. I used to walk up to the window. She had trouble getting out of the car and walking, so then as she was getting older, started driving. And since then, to this day, I still drive to Dutch Brothers, go through the drive-through line, and get a coffee out of habit, basically. And remembering that, I'd take her, and then they would give her a little biscuit, and she, her little stub of a tail would like, she'd get so excited. And that was just our thing. Every day we'd do that. And, the first few weeks to a month after that happened, after she died, they asked me about her, like, where's Zona? And I just like broke down crying, and like couldn't even order, and just had to like go through. And it was a fucking hard thing. And now, yeah, I mean, I'm still, yeah, still miss her, but pretty quickly, nonetheless, back to some semblance of normal. It's kind of where I am. Just in general, I think, well, I don't want to go on. I don't want to go into a whole deep, introspective psychoanalysis of myself here, but it's good and useful for a lot of things because, yeah, I mean, like starting a business, for example. A lot of people think that a lot of people should start businesses. You have to be fucking crazy unless you have a lot of money, and I mean, like, really, unless you have a lot of money or a lot of support, it's gonna suck such fucking ass. And you're gonna go through periods where you just have no money and things are not working, and you're like, like the whole thing could just implode on you. And then also at the same time, there are other things you could be doing that would actually be paying you money. And you're like, ugh. And if you're a normal, reasonable person, like a well-adjusted person, I don't think you would want to do that. Yeah, I don't think it's a good thing that I'm the kind of person. I mean, I do. It's been good for me, but I don't think people should have to do that. And I also don't think it's certainly not a normal thing that's just something I can do. And you see this as something like people should start a business. Fuck no. If you want to, and you really have some. Now, I do think, if we had universal basic income, if we had like universal health care, a lot of like a nice safety net, if you could have a subsistence living without having any income, then maybe, yeah, start a business if you must. But in the current situation as it is today, unless you have something where you're going to generate revenue right away, and that really limits your options, it's hard. It's not fun. It's not easy. And I mean, it is fun. There are good things about it. There's a lot of freedom. And if things work out, and I do think things eventually, if you keep at it, will work out, but keeping at it when it's like grinding and painful is really not within, it's not even available to a lot of people. If you have kids, I don't think it's responsible or a good thing to do. Now, I'm not shaming people that do it, but yeah, it's kind of crazy. It annoys the shit out of me when I see people say, especially when you think like there are people who work 2 or 3 jobs just to make ends meet, and there are people who tell them, start a business. Like, motherfucker, this person is spending all their time and energy just getting by, and they don't even have the option to do it. They can't even think about it because all of their mental energy is exerted just subsisting. And you think that they can do this whole, I mean, come on. But anyway, it works for me for that. With that though, yeah. I don't know if you can tell, it's nighttime. I usually record these in the morning, but I'm always tired because of this fucking insomnia thing. Talk more about that later. But I'm very tired now. I'm gonna crash. So, thank you very much for listening or watching, and 再见。